During the early history of cinema, the production code severely limited the content of films, forbidding sex, violence, and drugs from appearing in movies. There were no ratings, only passed or failed the code. But in the 1950s, the code began to weaken due to a combined impact of television, influence from foreign films, and bold directors. One such director was Alfred Hitchcock, who kicked off the 1960s with one of movie's first slasher films, Psycho, whose realistic depictions of violence and scenes that some found too risque was a tough sell to censors. It really pushed the envelope further than any Hollywood movie had up till that point. In the most famous scene, a young Janet Leigh is stabbed in the shower repeatedly. An ad campaign during the film asked audience to not spoil the scene and told theaters to refuse admission after the movie began. Hitchcock's follow-up, The Birds, pushed the boundaries further with realistic gore special effects, which featured scenes where eyes are gouged out. The same year as The Birds, a former pornographer makes the first splatter movie, the cult sensation Blood Feast. Blood Feast was a direct reaction to Psycho. The director felt that Psycho had cheated by not showing the action of the murder, and just the results. The results of not cheating was bathtubs of blood. 1967's Violent, Bonnie and Clyde won praise from critics and the counterculture alike and is considered one of the first films in the new Hollywood movement. Bonnie and Clyde is one of the first feature films to use squibs for a blood splattering effect, and with the end result being one of the most realistic and gruesome death scenes in cinema history. The theme of realistic violence, in 1968, the Roger Corman-produced B-movie thriller Targets revolves around the senseless violence of a gunman whose climax involves patrons of a drive-in being senselessly sniped. To accommodate directors' visions and to avoid an intrusive government censorship, the MPAA unveiled the voluntary rating system on November 1st, 1968. The ratings originally being G for general audiences, PG for parental guidance, R for restricted, and X for no younger than 16 admitted. The envelope-pushing movies of the 60s helped usher in the rating system, and the rating system made it easier for the boundaries to be pushed further in the years to come. In 1968, George Romero's classic zombie movie, The Night of the Living Dead, is released, who notably featured children in some of the most violent moments of the film. Closing out the decade was The Wild Bunch, Sam Peckinpah's blood-soaked western. Peckinpah's growing frustration with the Vietnam War and what he perceived to be the utter lack of reality seen in westerns up to that time inspired the violent tone of the movie. His goal being he wanted audiences to know what it felt like to be gunned down. Wild Bunch is most notably known for its high body count and squib work. The Wild Bunch is considered one of the greatest films of the 60s and of all time, earning many award nominations and closing the decade out in violent style.